Hello and welcome to the NTI PodTalk. My name is Diane Kaler and I'm Director of Nutrition Therapy Institute. Join me as I talk to interesting people in the field of health and wellness, food and farming, and anywhere else we find conversations that matter to our community. By listening, you'll learn a little about NTI and a lot about the things and people around you that make a difference for your wellness. Welcome and let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the NTI PodTalk. This is Diane Kaler, Director of Nutrition Therapy Institute, and I am thrilled to have on two people today as guests. Scott and Megan, I feel like I know you probably more than you know me because I have been following your business and have been a customer of your business for a long time. I think you've been in business for more than 10 years, if my math is correct. But Scott and Megan are owners of Jackson's, which used to be called Jackson's Honest, and I'm sure will tell us a little bit about their journey. You make chips and have a whole line of snack foods, chips. And so I am just really interested in hearing your journey and hearing your story because, we are a nutrition school. We talk about nutrient density and how to eat to optimize health. And usually chips wouldn't be on the list of things that we would be talking about. But you have an interesting story. So I think we should just get started on that and we'll kind of build on what you're doing now. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome. And I would love to get a little background on you and why you started this company.
Thanks for the introduction, and thanks for being such a longtime fan. That increasingly as time wears on, we come across folks who have known us from the start less frequently, and it's always great to hear from folks that we have had a long relationship with and that you've liked the products from the beginning. We really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it has been over 10 years, so you're right, Diane.
12 years, yeah. July 23rd, I remember it like it was yesterday. July 23rd, 2012, sold our first bag of potato chips about 300 yards from here at a tiny little health food store in Crested Butte, Colorado.
Yeah. All right, good. Well, so first of all, let's talk about what inspired you to even come up with this product, start this company, and really start this, this life for you, because it truly was, I think, something that was had to do with your life and your family. So let's start by talking about that, your inspiration.
Yeah, so the company is named after our oldest son, Jackson, and he is the oldest of 4 kids that we have, 2 boys and 2 girls. And Jackson had a rare autoimmune disease, and it was undiagnosed for 12 years. And so over the course of that 12-year period, it started when he was about 2, and finally got a diagnosis when he was 14. And so over the course of that time frame, he lost his ability to walk and talk. And it really looked like something inflammatory, autoimmune, similar to MS or ALS, and this regression and this loss of skills. So we were frantically searching around the country for a diagnosis and not finding one. And, his quality of life was deteriorating. Certainly his functionality was deteriorating. And so Scott and I, really were grasping at straws and just trying to create some, just sort of this better day in and day out situation for him. And not really, like, we were still looking for a diagnosis, but visiting specialists and having them scratch their heads and turn us away and say, we have no idea. It was demoralizing. And so we were looking at, like, what can we control? What can we try to affect on a daily level that at least makes him more comfortable and, able to sleep for longer periods of time and sort of out of some pain. Right. And for us, the only thing we could try to control was what he was eating. And what we were giving him supplement wise. And so we really started to look at his diet through the lens of, not like, oh, is he reacting to gluten, or does he need to be dairy free? Because those were sort of like, that were things we'd already done, try to minimize this like taxing digestive process for him, and really go to like the next level. And for us, and for him, that was like trying to identify this ratio of macronutrients, right? Like the ratio of carbs, fats, and proteins he was eating, and the types and the types, right? And so, we were starting to go down this keto road, and in working with the GI doctor we had, that was really off limits. Keto was for controlling epilepsy and seizures. And
Yeah, right.
why else would you be doing that and following that strict diet if that's not what you were trying to solve for? And we were just asking a lot of questions about that, right? Like, well, your brain is mostly fat, and we're trying to control what we think is inflammation. And so, we think really minimizing the carbs and increasing the fats is going to support that. And they weren't really supportive of that, but we were, like I said, really grasping at straws and trying to keep him alive, honestly. And he was like, what, probably 4? This was when he was maybe 4.
He was 17 pounds at 4
Yeah, he
years
was
old.
tiny.
Wow.
Like,
we were in the hospital. He had pancreatitis and all sorts of systemic things were happening, and we just said we've got to solve for this in a way that's sort of non-hospital based. That let's figure out what we can control from a dietary standpoint, and what people are respond to. So in the buckets of he can't have this and he can't have this, that took a long time, a solid 2 years. And we realized those two buckets of can't have and can have were vastly different. The common denominator of which was one was effectively an anti-inflammatory diet, and the other one was a pro-inflammatory diet. And as Megan mentioned, we had very few clues about what the underlying problem or diagnosis was, the underlying physiological disease was, but we did have some indications that there was some underlying, slow burning inflammation process taking place, the nature of which we didn't understand, neither did doctors, but we thought, okay, let's do things that reduce that. And so that's the ethos or the North Star we had. And then we reverse engineered based on trying things, and he responded well or not, sometimes within hours. And then after about 2 years, we had a bucket that looked like the ketogenic diet, like high in ancestral fats and proteins, low in carbs, and the carbs that they did have were complex carbs, certainly mostly root vegetables. So absolutely no simple sugars or any refined sugars. Those we knew right away were totally insulting to his particular condition. So it was a part. The reason why I'm exploring this a little bit is that it was the reason we decided to start a business, because that reverse engineering process was incredibly costly to Jackson, because we were constantly changing his diet, and sometimes he'd react poorly, sometimes he'd react well, and we would chase down dead ends on stuff that would or wouldn't work, and it took a long time to figure out what macronutrients were good, what micronutrients were important, supplements to those macronutrients, what preparations needed to happen, what brands for those particular things were quality brands that he could tolerate. So whatever that list of acceptable foods, brands, and supplements and micronutrients looked like, it was just a very hard won war, and Jackson paid that price. And we thought, we can't keep this thing that's helped him so much with a disease we do not know the name of, nor even the underlying physiology, and not share it with the world. And that was Megan's insight. And she dragged me kicking and screaming into the business part of this, because I thought, gosh, this is super difficult. The salty snack business is unbelievably concentrated with a very large number, small number of very large firms that control the supply chain, the distribution, pricing, and et cetera. And I said for a while to her, gosh, Megan, this is going to be really, really hard. And she said, I know, but we have to do it. We have to share this story, this food list that what we went through, so that if there's anyone else out there dealing with an inflammatory condition, and oh, by the way, the diseases of modern man all have one common denominator, and that is an inflammation process that is either sub control or totally out of control. We can help them perhaps on the margin at least. And so that was the reason we got into this, because of Megan's refusal to say, yeah, that's too difficult, we can't do that. It didn't matter against the potential upsides of helping even one other family who might be suffering, whose children or themselves might be suffering on the basis of having an undiagnosed inflammatory process taking place that could be ameliorated even on the margin from a quality of life standpoint by perhaps changing some of the things they can buy at a grocery store.
Yeah. That is an amazing story. And, it just shows, I think, the fortitude and the determination and the, drive that parents and, I see a lot of it in moms to help their children when their children are sick. I am really curious. Did you have any kind of background in health or nutrition? Like what even, so, I will just say that, it is a very rare person who, when there is a health condition, unfortunately, when there is a health condition, they don't jump to food as their first option of ways to address health issues. And while I think that's maybe changing a little bit and probably has changed more, over the past 12 to 14 to 20 years, whatever, but back when you were experiencing this, and I was in much the same boat, although my son did not have as dramatic of a health condition as yours, but 25 years ago, when I was trying to investigate ways to help my son's health conditions, diet was just not even something that anybody would consider. And you already said that your doctors weren't on board with this, but did you have some sort of background? Like, what made you jump to diet as being the first thing?
Yeah, no, we did not have backgrounds in
Yeah.
nutrition or our physicians ourselves or anything sort of medically related. It's definitely on the business side of our experience. But, I think people thought we were kooky to begin with. So Jackson, to sort of cut to the end of this story, Jackson, or maybe it's not the end because we're still doing this, but Jackson passed away from this rare disease from a drug trial. He was on an experimental drug trial for this disease. And like within a year of getting a diagnosis, he was part of a drug trial. And then about a year and a half into that, he died from a dosage increase. And so I say that because, well, it's important in this story, but it's also, our ability to continue to do this and share his story and do things like this, we're so grateful for, because we get to continue to talk about him, and this business continues to be his legacy. And so he would be 23 years old right now. And even when he was born that long ago, right, Scott and I were looking for no VOC paint and like having to source that from across the country and have it shipped to us, and an organic crib mattress and things that we were, wool carpets, things that we were already, these really annoying yuppies who were going over and above of what everyone else was doing. And you just go to the Toys R Us and buy a crib mattress.
And your parents certainly don't understand it.
No, everyone thought we were like ridiculous out of the gate. And so
can I defend ourselves?
No, I don't need to defend it, because it is what's happening now. That is exactly what the norm.
But it wasn't a social thing for us. I was a chemical engineer undergrad, so I had some sort of tangential relationship with the chemical manufacturing industry. And so, and in that process of gaining that degree, I saw the tentacles of that business in every single other consumer products business you care to mention. And I thought food, 100%. I remember my advisor saying to me my junior year, hey, Nabisco is going to come and interview some chemical engineers for positions. And I said, what? And he goes, yeah, they're going to come to interview. I was like, the food company? He goes, yeah. They need engineers. Like, what possibly could they use chemical engineers for? So all we had learned was how to fractionate oil into methane and ethane and butane and all of the other fractionated products from crude oil. And he went on to explain, why that was. But I was gobsmacked. I was like, I don't understand this. I was a fairly educated person at the point. I had no idea what he was talking about. My only point in all of this is that our predisposition, and in fact, the basis of Megan and I's relationship was kind of this, because I was sort of proselytizing to her when we met in college.
He was preaching, but I was like drinking a Diet Coke. He's like, you really don't want to be drinking. I thought I was like, you're 20 years old. What the hell are you talking about?
So in college in 1991, I'm sort of like, no, maybe you should think about this. And it obviously worked. She married me. We were together for 30 years, but
it was annoying. I can tell you that.
My only point in all of this is that we did not, our only instinct was that we were a little bit skeptical of the industrialized farming / industrialized food chain concepts back then. And we thought, well, that can't be good. Jackson is not doing well for reasons we do not understand. Let us remove any and all potential insults to his physiology, up to and including things that he would breathe, drink, and eat, or touch, as it were. So we sort of did that before he got sick, as an instinct, and then it went into absolute hyper overdrive.
Yeah, it went into very hyper overdrive. Like it was a lot, and it was a lot to try to manage. But I think back to your question, your original question, I think we were already sort of living in this space that was aware of, consuming food that didn't have dyes and preservatives and, really wasn't artificial, which again made us really annoying to most of the people around us. And they felt like we were preaching to them. And it was like, hey, I'm just making some different choices here. But it's certainly way more standardized now. There's much better accessibility, as we know, to things that we were making from scratch, like kombucha and sauerkraut and, things that smell really difficult in your home and like always had sort of bone broth brewing or chicken broth, right? And like people would come to our house and our kids would have friends over and they'd be like, your house smells awful. And it was like constant chicken broth because Jackson needed us like slow cook liver in homemade chicken broth, right? And so there were so many things you couldn't buy over the counter and off the shelf. And I think starting this company, we had been waiting for another company like Boulder Canyon or Kettle to be making chips in an oil that was this non-seed oil and not inflammatory, and they weren't doing it. And so this was part of my harebrained idea, like, well, we have this story and it's meaningful and people will react to that. And I think this is something we should do because no other company is doing it. It's not on their radar. We were just living in this space.
Yeah, that's, I completely resonate with that because, I get people like recently within the past couple of months, several months, what's this whole thing about seed oils and, like what difference does it make what you eat? Why is this so new? Just because they're now just sort of hearing about it, certainly over the last year. And I'm like, this is nothing new. I've been talking about this for 25 years. And I am just thrilled that now it's sort of, on the main stage and it's made it into the mainstream discussion. Even though there is still a lot of controversy over this concept that what you eat has an immediate impact. And, I want to go back to what you said when you were talking about your journey. You said that you realized that you had to do something that was having an influence on your son on, you know, a daily basis. And certainly diet is one of the most influential things that we are interacting with on not only just daily, but 3 times a day, 5 times a day, you know, depending on how often you're eating. And so it is one of the most direct ways that we can impact not just acute health outcomes, but long-term health outcomes because of the foods that we eat. So I'm like, you know, we are simpatico here. So you know, you talked about how you kind of ended up uh, getting to the point where it was more of a keto diet, and he was really benefiting from that keto diet. So let's talk about, you know, why was it that fats ended up being something that was so important and profound in your journey with your son's health condition?
I mean, the very, very short answer, Diane, is that we found a diet that kept his circulating insulin levels as low as they could possibly be.
Mhm.
Full stop. That's it.
Yep.
And if you understand that whole process of the macronutrients, fat, proteins, carbohydrates, and how they're converted to energy, then that statement makes a ton of sense. And so you know, we tend to actually shy away from the idea of sort of a ketogenic diet, because a ketogenic diet traditionally and technically is a pretty narrow.
Yes.
We tend to think of it just as a low inflammation diet, which can be achieved based on your lifestyle, your budget, your predilections, your taste buds, and many other dimensions. It can be achieved in lots of different ways. It doesn't necessarily need to be that you eat nothing but coconut oil every single day. That is completely extreme for any normal human being, right?
Yeah.
And again, people exist on a spectrum of inflammation based on their age, their phenotype, their all sorts of variables that can't be sort of understood in advance until you test it. And that's what we did with Jackson with his particular disease. What works, what doesn't for him, that ultimately just tried to control an inflammatory process, which for him was genetic in origin. But there are plenty of acquired, either through environmental factors, smoking, drinking, or you know, disease states, or any number of other things that you can acquire an inflammatory process. And then the only question is whether it's in control or it controls you. And so we prefer to call it a low inflammation diet.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of foundational principles to that. And as a general rule of thumb, the two foundational principles for a low inflammation diet are: take away refined sugars, full stop. That, like, just start there. If you do nothing else, that's going to be helpful. And then maybe a little more subtle is, you know, remove omega-6 linoleic acid, which is to say seed oils, from your diet. If you do that and replace them with the alternative, so instead of sugar, have sweet potatoes. Instead of sugar, have you know, celery or carrots, you know, you name the vegetable. There are also sources of glycogen in your bloodstream, just like sugar is, but a totally different physiological response to those than you would for, you know, glucose. And the same with the oils. You know, have butter, have coconut oil, have avocado oil, have some of the ancestral oils that human beings have been eating for 5,000 to 10,000 years and been just fine doing so in moderation. You know, again, we're not, you know, preaching that. We have no background in this other than our experience with our son. So we're not advice givers in any way. We just say this is what worked for us. And there appears to be a fairly large literature that says, you know what, there's some actual physiology and mechanisms of energy production behind this that make it make sense if your goal is low inflammation.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it's challenging for the average person to understand this, because seed oils, you know, and for those who are new to this, seed oils are corn oil, safflower oil, soybean oil, you know, canola oil. These seed oils are heavily promoted by many of our, you know, health experts. And then when they hear people like us, like me, us here at Nutrition Therapy Institute, as well as what we're talking about here and what you found in your journey, we're trying to avoid seed oils. And so it gets to be really confusing. Have you encountered that both, well, maybe on a personal level, but also in your work, forging this business where you had a commitment to not use seed oils, and seed oils also happen to be cheap, meaning inexpensive, as well as cheap, meaning not very good quality. And I would imagine there might have been some pushback or some conflict as you're trying to get into this industry. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that's I'm making assumptions.
No, you're right. We were way ahead of the curve on the seed oil conversation, right? Because like you said, over the last year is really when it's become a more acceptable or sort of relatable part of the conversation, and people reading labels for whether something has a seed oil, it is used, like a seed oil is used to manufacture it. Or not. And again, there are many more choices if you're trying to avoid them than what we were confronted with, 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, we did have a lot of questions about, like, when we initially started, we were using coconut oil. And so we had a lot of questions about why coconut oil. On the flip side of that, there weren't any other salty snacks cooked in coconut oil. So we were the first
There
to
were not. Yep.
And so it was a new product and a new oil. And, we certainly had some retailers right out of the gate who embraced it and understood it, like Whole Foods, like Natural Grocers.
Natural Grocers, yeah.
Like Natural Grocers, 100%. I mean, we were preaching to the choir when we were talking to them and their customer base. Very educated customers, know exactly what they're looking for. And I'd say Whole Foods as well. And so, and there were certain areas of the country that adopted our products and were early in that process too, like the Pacific Northwest, right? Southern California, we didn't have to educate those customers, and it went west to east. Again, our own region, like Rocky Mountain region, I would say pretty well educated around why we were avoiding seed oils. And so, it's been refreshing change of conversation. But I think the average consumer, like you've talked about already, had no idea. I mean, they were looking for gluten-free, whether something was gluten-free. And so they were, much further back on that conversation, but have really come up to speed in the last kind of 18 months around, reading labels for seed oils. And certainly it's a hot topic now in our news and politically as well as otherwise. And so for us, I think it feels like a bit of redemption.
Yes, I feel the same.
and that there was something there. And I think, our son finally got this diagnosis at the National Institute of Health, and that organization in Bethesda, Maryland, is unbelievably impressive, vast, wide experience that resides there. And, the special team that we were working with, they were all PhDs and MDs. And so they were clinical physicians, but they were also very interested in research and understanding, like in our case, what we were doing nutritionally with Jackson. And so, they were the first kind of point of redemption for us, the first validation that what we'd been doing, that was in 2016 that he got this diagnosis through them, 2015, I guess. And, they said, hey, you did sort of reverse engineer back end into this anti-inflammatory, low inflammation diet. And that was the first time we'd heard from anyone with, expertise or any kind of, sort of initials beyond their name that we were doing something right and that we were making a difference in Jackson's life.
Yeah, it was one of the most personally moving things I had ever heard, because up until that point, it was 12 years of being in a complete vacuum and hoping and praying we were doing the right thing. And the only evidence we had was that Jackson was happier and healthier, that he slept
Right.
longer, he was able to put on a little weight. He didn't gain any of the finer gross motor skills that he'd lost, but he was happier. It never affected him cognitively. So, he was able to interact with us more. He was incredibly expressive with his eyes and his stares and such. And so we were able to communicate more with him. I mean, there was a point in this journey for 18 months early on in it where Jackson didn't sleep for more than 90 minutes and would
Oh
wake
my
up
gosh.
crying. And
Yeah.
so it was devastating for us in that existential period. We were like, what do we do here? And that was the original source. And then all of that sort of came out of our bodies. And I remember crying about it when they said, congratulations, you've stumbled on, not
Wow.
stumbled, they didn't use the word stumble, but you've
Yeah.
created the most inflammation diet a human being can have. And that's just what he needed for this particular genetic disease. And it was the first time anyone had ever said, bravo, to us as parents. And so it was, I guess in retrospect, I hope I wouldn't have needed that stamp of approval from a PhD MD, but it felt great in the moment because it was just a bit of, as Megan said, validation that 12 years of unbelievable discipline on Jackson's part, as lesser on our part in purchasing it, preparing all this stuff constantly, as Megan said, the broth, etc. It was a bit of validation. And again, maybe I want to bring it back to the larger point that not everyone's going to have a incredibly rare orphan disease like Jackson had that has an underlying pathophysiology that is rooted in massive inflammation.
Absolutely.
That requires that level of discipline and such. People can eat Lay's potato chips no problem as long as it's not 50% of their diet, right? We can all metabolize omega-6 linoleic acid that's been processed at high heats and high pressures with a bunch of chemicals to clean it. That we can do that as long as it's in moderation. The challenge is often it's not in moderation, and these things are cumulative, like smoking and drinking are cumulative. The first year is okay, but the 5th, 7th, 10th, 15th, 20th year, then it's hard to reverse some of those things. And the same is true with diet. We can metabolize all sorts of non-awesome things, and the human body is incredibly resilient that way. Megan and I were just on a mission to provide some alternatives so that people could go down that aisle and say, okay, today or this week or this month, I don't want that stuff. I'm going to try these for a little bit. And so we've never wanted to be, religious or about this and sort of preachy about it. We just want to provide a choice for folks so that they can, in fact, balance whatever their needs are against whatever their goals are.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I am all about, providing education so that people can make informed decisions. I'm not about like preventing and restricting and saying no, but like just be aware of the choices and the potential consequences of the choices. And then from there, make whatever decisions you want. And I think it's awesome that you provide a different option. And certainly when, I first experienced your chips, and I will say that it was my husband that found them, because I never even looked at chips, and he was always looking for a chip made with coconut oil because of what he knew from me. And that is that, coconut oil is probably the best thing to be making chips in. And at the time he's like, I found one. So he was thrilled to death. And I think it's awesome that, people have choice. That's what is so great about, our capitalistic society, is that we have the right to make choices. And as long as we have options from which to make those choices, I think it's awesome. So I do want to talk about your transition from coconut oil to avocado oil, because as I said, and you said, originally you were doing it in coconut oil, you were doing it, started in your own kitchen. I can't imagine trying to cook potato chips in my own kitchen using any kind of oil, let alone coconut oil. So can you talk about that transition and any influences on that transition?
Yeah. Do you want me to start?
Yeah, sure.
There's a couple of dimensions to it. There is, first and foremost, there's a consumer preference dimension to it.
Yeah.
There's also a manufacturing issue related to how to manage it. And then there's a supply chain issue as well. And so first and foremost,
I don't know there are issues. I think they're
just challenges.
considerations.
Yeah, because it challenges.
Yeah.
Yeah. First and foremost, customers were telling us, hey, sometimes I don't want the coconut oil. Sometimes it's heavy. Sometimes it's saturated. I'd like something a little lighter. And so, and we saw the rest of the market flourishing in salty snack and offering that as a choice. And we said, okay, given our ethos of, hey, we should provide a choice. And so as part of that, we said, let's add avocado to the portfolio, and then the two oil sources compete against each other effectively in the marketplace. And, again, we never want to prescribe to people what they should be doing. You tell us within certain boundary conditions, like, okay, it has to be an ancestral oil that people have been eating for thousands of years, right? It can't be something somebody invented 10 years ago. Or in the case of canola oil in 1974. I mean, that was invented in 1974, right? And so the larger point is that within the confines of that ancestral fats bucket, we said, well, let's just let the market decide. And the market, increasingly kept telling us we want more of these avocado potato chips. And we eventually sort of said, okay, then that's fine. Coconut oil, I can tell you, I was the COO, CFO of Jackson's for a very long time before we brought in partners. And now we have people that are much, much smarter about doing this stuff than I was. It is an unbelievable challenge to do it. It's solid. You got to heat it up. Coconut oil.
Yeah.
It is solid. It must be heated in the right way. All the equipment in the chip manufacturing industry, which has been around for 100+ years now, is all optimized for liquid oils. Whatever at a source, whether it's, generally all the ones you just mentioned, cottonseed, soybean, canola, etc. Avocado oil, like olive oil, is liquid at room temperature. Coconut oil is not. And I literally remember standing on top of a huge chunk, 2,000 pounds of coconut oil. And because we had to get this manufacturing done, like chipping away at it with an axe to break it up, to put it in the fryer, early days. It was unbelievably difficult in every respect. So that was sort of the manufacturing and commercial aspects of it that made it very, very difficult. And the other part was supply chain is early on, when the coconut oil supply chain was very robust because the rest of the world used coconut oil all over the place. So we sourced ours from a number of different Far Eastern countries and did so with relative ease. At the time, avocado oil was very, very hard to find. It was not in proliferation like it is today. So once it became a little bit more available from sources we could trust, we said, okay, now it's available and customers are voting with their wallets, we want avocado oil. We said, okay, let's now bring it into the portfolio, because before it would have been a double the cost of our coconut oil chip, which was already double the cost of any other potato chip. So it would never have succeeded in the market because the supply chain was so complicated and so immature. It is now, thankfully, thanks to capitalism and supply chains, as it were, it is available. So all three of those dimensions played a role, but at the end of the day, consumers said with their choices, we want avocado oil, and happy to do it, because for us, monounsaturated fats, saturated fats, both stable when you heat them, both have been consumed for millennia. And so it all fit with the ethos of choice and ancestral oils and low inflammation for us.
Nope.
No, that's good. That's really interesting. So you do not have any coconut oil options now?
Correct.
That's
Correct.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Just a recent decision.
Yeah. And the if memory serves, you originally started using like typical russet potatoes. Maybe I'm wrong. Again, correct me on anything that I'm remembering incorrectly. But I think you were using just regular, like, sort of russet, whatever people use for potato chips. I don't know. But now, do you use all sweet potato, or do you still have?
Let me just one point of clarification. We never used russets. They're not quite optimized for a whole set of complex reasons.
It's more the cooking.
It's for the cooking, the sugars, the specific gravity. There's all sorts of the potato, by the way, is one of nature's most unheralded vegetables. You know, it is it's complicated. It's alive when you slice it and put it in. It's an amazing
Oh my
vegetable. But we
gosh.
never used russets.
Oh,
And never
okay.
used russets. We'd always use very specific types of heirloom potatoes that chipped effectively. That's the terminology, that chipped really well.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
not
okay.
standardized on sweet potatoes.
Oh, well, thank you for that clarification.
Well,
Yeah.
You're right that we made white potatoes, we made sweet potatoes, we expanded to tortilla chips in coconut oil. We made purple potato chips, which are
Yes, I
continue-
remember the purple ones.
they
Yes.
were a fan favorite.
Yeah.
Loved those.
And
Yeah.
they all cooked differently because of the type of potato as well as the coconut oil. So
Right.
so it really varied based on the type of potato we used. And so, you know, when Scott mentioned the partners that we work with, who are just an amazing team of people, on the capital as well as the human kind of capital partner side too. So the team that we've got in place now, across all parts of the business, from manufacturing to leadership, and the sort of capital folks that we've got in place, have been really amazing partners for Jackson's, for Scott and I, for the brand itself. And when we were starting to work with them, we did a lot of brand work that we'd never been able to do before for the business. And we always knew our best-selling product was sweet potato chips. And when we really dove into this brand work, and looked at the data, it was head and shoulders our best product. And so, you know, when we were trying to figure out, who are we as a brand? What is our identity? You know, what is our message? What's the narrative? Who's our consumer? You know, it was very clear that it was along the sweet potato line. And so, you know, we pulled back all of those other products that we were offering and went all in on sweet potato. You know, how do we innovate around that on a flavor basis, on a format, like snack size to big bags to, you know, kind of opening up different partners when we're talking about different formats. So like convenience to big box, and everything in between. And so that's really what we've been in the market with for the past 2 years, exclusively. And then kind of over the next sort of 6 months, we're going to have some new products out in market that are more similar to what we were offering in the past. So some white potato chips coming back to market in avocado oil. And then another product we're really happy about that I'm not at liberty to share yet.
All right.
But something that we really, as this innovative, kind of healthier version of snacks that you enjoy, it's along that path, and we're really excited about it.
Nice. Good. Well, I'm interested
stay
to
tuned.
see it show up on the shelf. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So I want to kind of bring it back to your journey as parents. I think that the statistics are that, you know, autoimmune diseases are increasing. People who are getting diagnosed with autoimmune diseases are increasing, whether or not the actual rate is increasing or just the diagnosis is increasing is unclear. But so, you know, there is a lot of uncertainty when people get diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, and there's something like more than maybe even 100 different types of autoimmune diseases. And so there's not consistency in every single disease, but there is a lot of uncertainty, maybe even fear around autoimmune diseases. You know, just from your own personal experience, can you give any kind of advice or tips? It's, you know, not medical advice. We're not doing that here. But just, you know, like practical advice, particularly maybe to parents whose children have been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, even if it's not something as, you know, tragic and life-threatening as your son's was.
Yeah, and I can provide, through our experience with Jackson, and maybe a couple of observations, and Megan, let me know if I'm missing any. The first one was that the immune system was just sort of recognized as a separate thing in the 60s. Like, so the science here is not very old, which is to say that the immune system is extraordinarily complicated, and it's a complex adaptive system that we know very little about.
Yeah,
Or
even
what we
still
do know-
today.
yeah, what we do know about is relatively recently gained knowledge.
And
So
honestly, those are words that we heard from the immunologists.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, hey, this is like, we don't know everything about the immune system. And we know
Right.
that there are places where it's breaking down in Jackson, but we don't have an explanation for why.
yeah, some of the most
Mhm.
frustrating things we'd say is we do some tests at National Jewish, which is an incredible, one of the best, if not the best, immunology hospitals and respiratory hospitals here in Colorado and Denver. And they would do all sorts of tests and say, you know, we'd see test results come back as complement C4, as complement C5 would come
Mhm.
back, and you know, those are really hugely elevated. And we're like, oh, fantastic. Well, what does that mean? Like, we do not know. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, you just tested for these things. What do you mean you don't know what they mean physiologically? Like,
Yeah.
well, you know, again, it's sort of a new thing. You know, there are some indications that maybe it could mean these things, but he doesn't have that. So there's knowledge you can have about the immune system that don't give you any conclusions effectively. So I'd start there as my first broad observation as a parent of a child with this. My second observation would be that, and this is my personal one, that the immune system, in order for it to be sort of in sort of a highly reactive or an autoimmune state, generally that happens either because of some genetic disease like Jackson had, or some sort of chronic insult that has disorganized it over time. And so, and sometimes it can be short, you know, a year or two, and sometimes it can be decades in terms of the onset of some of these things, depending on what you've got. And some of them can be onset through a disorganization through a virus or a pathogen, for instance. And so our, I should say, sort of theory of the case was, okay, something else caused this. At the time, we didn't know it was genetic. We just sort of, something caused this, and then let's see if we can't, from the outside in, sort of ameliorate whatever the cause is. Let's stop insulting his immune system in any way we can, since we don't know what the original insult was, whether it was genetic or not. Let's just sort of stop insulting it. So what would be the things theoretically that would insult your immune system? You know, the obvious ones, okay, soda and candy, like okay, not that we were giving them a lot of that, but like became very, very strict. And so, and then we just performed that reverse engineering of, okay, we give them this, and what's his reaction? Bad or good? Okay, and then it goes into a pile of never again, or let's try it twice. And then we just kept doing that for years and years, and looking on it in retrospect, oh gosh, this is a low inflammation set of foods that he can have, and these are the ones that he can have, and they're generally high inflammation. So that was the approach we took, was let's just stop insulting his immune system so that it could self-organize the way it wants to, if it's able to genetically. In Jackson's case, it wasn't, but that it could be able to self-organize the way, in theory, nature intended it to. So that was the only sort of two observations I'd make. Were there any others that you'd pass along that we've learned in the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, sort of any tips for someone who might be new to an autoimmune disease is, you know, there is definitely an inflammatory process happening. Clearly, that's the definition of the autoimmune, and the immune system's confused and attacking itself. And so how do I try to manage inflammation? How do you answer that question? And you know, I think the default is through what you're consuming, so through your diet, and then, you know, trying some supplements, right? And they can help marginally, turmeric, all of the, you know, all of the things that you know or can research, but really, you know, how do I try to control inflammation in my body or in my child's body or my spouse or my partner, right? And so that's the question to ask. And then I think the answers are pretty evident pretty quickly on how you try to control that. You know, in addition to whatever pharmaceuticals you may have to take.
Yeah. Well, I found myself in a conversation just 2 weeks ago with a rheumatologist who, and so it's not just what you eat and drink, it's also what you breathe. She actually, at part of her practice, puts air quality monitors in her patients' homes, collects the data over an N weeks, and then tries to determine if there are any insults in that person's home that might be causing some of the immune reactions that she's seeing in her rheumatology clinic. And she said in about 25% of the cases, there is some air quality issue that is causing them to have issues from a rheumatology immunology standpoint. And I was blown away by that. I just learned that for the first time 2 weeks ago, and I never considered that. But this is a practicing rheumatologist been doing for 35 years as a standard of care now. She puts these things in her patients' houses and says, what are the insults? And so that's the way Megan and I started. What could be the insults into Jackson's immune system? And let's figure that out.
I do think when you're compromised and say you're diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, or that there's something, a process happening that is involving your immune system, right? And it mimics or looks like an autoimmune issue, but you may not have a diagnosis. When you're in that state and your body is in that process, like, you can be reactive to so many things that may not be the primary driver, but you're going to react to the air quality. You're going to react to the food that you're consuming, right? Like, if I think about Jackson, he was at such a fundamental, basic level of, like, when we saw something that didn't agree with him in his diet, like we fed him too many carbs one day, he reacted immediately, and we'd see it, and then we'd adjust accordingly. And so you're just in this highly reactive place that it doesn't surprise me that there's an air quality issue, for instance, because that may not be the case in 6 to 12 months if your immune system has like the intensity and the hyperactivity has increased, right? And so it does become this sort of spiral that you're in, and that's where you start, like, it's almost like Jenga, right? You're sort of like pulling things out to see if things collapse or not, and so you just keep pulling more things out.
Yeah, I think the keys, no matter, as I said, 100 different autoimmune diseases, and really anything that has an inflammatory component is, while there are specific targets towards the organ that is being affected by the autoimmune process, or the body system, certainly there are things you can do that are organ or system targeted, but generally an anti-inflammatory life, whether that be diet, environment, wool carpeting, as opposed to, whatever carpeting made out of petroleum, or whatever they're made out of. All those things can be beneficial because they have widespread implications on how reactive and how elevated and hyper reactive the immune system is. And then I think also it's, I am just a huge fan of self-education, doing research, and self-experimentation based on what you're learning. To just sit by and, wait for an expert to say, oh, here's the problem and here's what you need to do. I think I think we can all serve ourselves to be empowered to get as much education as you can, and then you have to do that experimentation, exactly what you were talking about. You saw when you did something on one day, you could see the results within, minutes or hours, and then you don't do that again, right? That's all about the personalization and the tailoring that has to be done for each individual's specific circumstances. So, yeah.
Well, and I think a really easy, basic test of that is like alcohol, right? So, like, do I feel worse? Does my body feel, I'm not talking about a hangover. I'm talking about, like, kind of, do I have some inflammation? Do I feel like, things are different, like the next day, the next few days after I have one drink or a beer or a hard alcohol, right? And so you can kind of A/B test that a little bit as a really easy example of what you consume, and then the output of that and how you feel pretty immediately.
Yeah, totally agree. I think candy and, sugary things, same thing. I think you can use those as a beta test as well. Yeah. All right, good. Well, I am going to ask you how our listeners and viewers can connect with you and find your products and support your mission. But anything else you want to talk about before we kind of wrap it up with that final contact stuff?
I mean, the only thing I'd like to add in conclusion is that if we did this sort of self-experimentation, the discipline it takes to unpack some of these very complicated processes that are underway inside of one's body or someone you love his body, if we could do it, anybody listening to this can do it. I fear that people would say, gosh, this is too difficult. They
Yeah.
must have been special, or they must have been, desperate. And yes, we were desperate, but if we did it, anyone can do it. And so this is within your control to experiment, to try some of these things out, and to get your arms around whatever that process is. And anyone can do this if we can do it. I think I really want to conclude with that, because we're no different than any other parents that faced with the same circumstances, they would have done the same thing. It just takes some stick-to-itiveness, and anyone can do it. And if your health is important to you, then you'll find the time and the energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would just say
appreciate
thank
that.
you for continuing to allow us to share Jackson's story and, talk about him as an inspiration for us, for our team, and our family. And, that's what's really meaningful to Scott and I. We love sharing about our products and where you can find them, and please support us. And, we're this small little brand, and all of these things kind of market related, but on a personal level, it's just great to be able to talk about him.
Yeah. Well, I, I did not know much of the history and the story, so I greatly appreciate you sharing your story and your openness and honesty and kind of going through, the whole thing. Because I imagine it still brings up, some emotional things for you. I can't imagine that it wouldn't. So I am really pleased that you took the time to be with us today. So with that, tell us how people can support your mission, find your products, and further, honor Jackson's memory.
Well, you can find them across the country, certainly online, on Amazon as well, and at retailers around the country. So big retailers you think of, like Whole Foods, Natural Grocers, a lot of Sprouts for sure. They've been a fantastic partner for us. And then all of the, sort of independent and smaller health food stores, and then big box store like Costco. They've been a great partner for us as well, and with us, and given us a great opportunity there. And so
Really psyched about the Costco partnership. Is it allows for an price point entry for consumers that historically wouldn't have been able to afford something at Whole Foods, for instance. And so they can go there, buy these big bags, and their families can eat them. And on a price per ounce basis, it's the best in the nation. So we're really psyched about that partnership for that reason, that it opens up a whole new group of consumers to introduce this eating to.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you should be able to find them pretty easily. And then
Okay.
they're online.
Great. Good. All right. And you have a website, I assume?
Yes, jacksonschips.com currently.
Okay.
It will change here in the next kind of couple months-ish.
Okay.
To just something that is a bit more of an umbrella or inclusive of
Okay.
the snack food company that we see ourselves as.
Great. Good. Well, I am looking forward to seeing what the future holds for you and your company. I'm looking forward to seeing new products potentially in the store. So
Yes.
that'll be awesome. All right.
Thanks,
Well,
Diane.
thanks so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.
Bye. Hi, Diane Kaler here again. If you found this conversation interesting and haven't already become a student at NTI, check us out at ntischool.com. We hope to see you soon.